Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final session today in what feels like it's been quite a long day. Delighted to be joined by Anna Walters, who is a DPO who works alongside me in the Risk Evolves team. For those of you that have been with us throughout the day, we've covered all types of aspects of good governance. We've looked a little bit at health and safety, we've looked at sustainability, we've looked at ESG, we've looked at some of the changes that have occurred, most importantly with Cyber Essentials over the last 12 weeks. And most importantly, now we're going to finish with a roundup of everything that's happening in the world, or we're going to try and summarise what's happening in the world of data privacy and especially the GDPR. So without further ado, let's see whether we can get into the question set. It seems to have stopped. That's not helpful, is it? There we go.
It's always the way,
a little bit
Helen,
about what we do. It's always the way. Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously the technology and not the presenter that's playing up. So a little bit about what we do. For those of you that have been with Risk Evolves, then you know that we are unashamedly governance, risk and compliance geeks, and we absolutely like the world of data privacy as well. So Anna, since we last met, which I think was in December, quick recap of what's been going on in the world of data privacy. It's been a little bit quiet, but some of the old debates and familiar debates have been rumbling on. So when we met in December, we said that we had a new commissioner coming on. What's he like? What do we know about him? What's he like?
Mr. Edwards, John Edwards. So he's joined us from New Zealand, where he was the commissioner there. I like him. All the things he seems to be doing at the moment, he's very, very different from Elizabeth Denham. I would recommend, especially if you're a Wordle fan, following him on Twitter. He talks a little bit about Wordle. But actually, do you know what? As lighthearted as that sounds, I think it's really nice that he's a very engaging, he's happy to be out there in the public. And I think he has a very different public face from what we saw with Elizabeth Denham, who I felt was sometimes a little bit cold and standoffish. Whereas John Edwards, he seems to be, he just seems to have a much more engaging way about him. So ticks in the box from that perspective. He's also...
It feels a little bit more approachable as well. Not that we are going around stalking our commissioner, because that would be wrong on many levels. And this call is being recorded, so anybody want to share that with John. But yeah, he does seem to be very much more championing data privacy, doesn't he, from the perspective of businesses and the individuals.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been keeping a bit of a close eye on what he's been doing and saying in the media. For the first month, he was very quiet, he didn't say anything. And then in this last few weeks, he started to get out there and done various interviews with the Financial Times, with the Telegraph, even with, what's the magazine for the homeless charity? Big issue. Yeah, so and I think that's starting to point to where his passion is. It seems to be that his focus is very much going to be around the protection of vulnerable people and their data. He's also talking a lot about children's data, and also talking really significantly about some of the basic protections that organisations should be taking to protect people's personal data. So it seems to be that his focus is actually in a much different space than where we may have seen before.
And actually, just to back that up as well on the children, so clearly we're familiar with the Children's Code, but what we've also seen as well, for anybody that's keeping an eye on the ICO's website, is I think it was a couple of weeks ago they issued a pack as well that was suitable for schools. So talking about privacy in schools, which I feel has been long overdue, talking to our young people about how they manage and keep their information private as well. Probably important in the world of social media and so on.
And just a top tip for everybody. Oh, sorry, Helen. Just a top tip for everybody. If you want to keep an eye on what Mr. Edwards is saying, and in a really brief and quick way, if you head onto the ICO website and go into the About the ICO, news and events, and find the ICO in the media page, seems to be a very new page that actually is giving summaries of all the interviews that Mr. Edwards is giving, with some of the kind of top comments. So really useful place to get a sense of what he's doing, what he's saying, and what his focus is.
Fantastic. Now, for those of you that are on the call, if you'd like to ask myself or Anna any questions around GDPR or data privacy or PECA, which is the one that looks after marketing and so on, just please feel free to pop them in the chat box, and we can probably take you off mute as well so that you can ask them in person. The F word, it's not often we mention the fines, is it? But there's been a couple of really big significant fines that not necessarily huge in volume, but in terms of the implications for companies. A couple of major announcements that have come from the ICO's office, in fact, just over the last 7 days. So do you want to touch on those, Anna?
Yeah, I can do. So I think this kind of change of commissioner, I think we're going to start seeing a little bit of change in this enforcement action, and I think these first couple that we're seeing are pointing to that direction. And I think what I just mentioned about Mr. Edwards focusing on the vulnerable, the first fine one of the first fines that they've issued is to 5 organisations who have been targeting the elderly and the vulnerable with really unwanted heavy marketing. And that total with that fine was just announced in the last couple of days, and it's totaling around about £400,000. So it's really, really significant that actually, that first enforcement notice, that first fine under Mr. Edwards, actually matches what we're seeing in terms of the message he's trying to give in his interviews, which is that focus on vulnerable people. So I think
I agree, and I thought what was really interesting about that particular fine as well was the collaboration that had taken place between the ICO and other agencies. For example, the Which the Consumer magazine, but also Age UK, who's obviously come together and looked at the data that they were hearing from their customers and clients, and came together collaboratively to work with the Commissioner to try and stamp this out. And again, not necessarily under the GDPR, but very much under the PECA regulations and what you need to do or should be doing when checking the TPS. How are you looking at the telephone preference service if you're doing any marketing? If you're doing marketing companies, are you checking the CTPS before you start picking up the phone and talking to people? So going back to some of the very, very basics principles of how you should be contacting people and making sure those are enforced. I think there's a good learning point, a good message that goes out to companies there around. Clearly the Commissioner's got a little bit, and we saw this a bit with Elizabeth Denham, didn't we? Zero tolerance on the breaches of the PECA regulations.
Absolutely.
So
I think, go on.
I was going to say, what about solicitors? That's been an interesting one as well.
So yeah, so there's a really interesting fine being given to a solicitors who suffered a ransomware attack. The ransomware attack came via a phishing email, and individual clicked on the link, kind of the common story, and what it did was the ransomware encrypted a set of their data, but also importantly encrypted a set of the data in the backups, so they lost access completely to it. Now unfortunately this was on an old archive server where they were hosting both civil and legal case bundles, so the data that was encrypted was all relating to these criminal and civil cases, some of which had really, really sensitive data in it. Now, there were about 24,000 cases that were involved in this. Unfortunately, 60 were extracted directly from the breach, and subsequently that data was also put for sale on the dark web. So, you can imagine that some of these cases, were involving some vulnerable people, witnesses, victims, and also, the alleged criminals. So the chance for damage to those individuals is quite significant. So they've been fined just under £100,000, so £98,000, and it's quite an interesting one because they haven't been fined for the breach per se. They have been fined because of a number of failures to protect the data. So one of the principles of the GDPR, there are 6 of them. One of them is that you must keep data secure, and this is the one that they have been fined under. And the 3 call-outs, the 3 takeaways that they listed on the enforcement notice was that they showed the lack of multi-factor authentication. They expected the ICO expected that solicitors protecting such sensitive data should be expected to have multi-factor authentication in place. Interestingly, they also cited lack of patch management. So the system that was infiltrated, there was a critical patch that was launched in the January. The attack happened in the June, and this was a critical patch that they hadn't applied. So again, there was they were quite strong in their messaging that organisations must be really on top of their patch management, and especially as solicitors who are processing that sensitive data. And then the final point that they drew out was failure to encrypt the data. This was data that was at rest, and there was just no encryption on it. It was in plain text format and it was easily available. So those were the 3 takeaways from that. So they were fined £98,000. And it was really interesting reading the enforcement notice, because what they cited was the negligence of the organisation, which was the main reason.
And for those of you that have been with us before, and for those of you that were with us on the call that started at 3 o'clock, where we spoke about the Cyber Essentials scheme. So Cyber Essentials is a scheme that does the Cyber Essentials minimum. It looks at the things that you must do, the absolutely litmus stuff that you cannot get away with not doing on a system. And 2 of those things are patching. The other one is around access. And I think it would be, it's probably safe to say that had the solicitors organisation been up to date with all their Cyber Essentials controls, it's not guaranteed, but it's unlikely that it would have happened, because patching is such a key part of Cyber Essentials. For those of you that are not technical, a patch is a little bit of software that is reapplied to a system which fixes a failure in the software. You'll typically recognise it as one of those really irritating messages that pops up that says, you know, you're just about to have some patches applied to your system, some security updates are being applied to your system, and perhaps you've got to restart your computer or restart the application that you're using. Not putting those patches on allows an potential exposure to develop in your systems. So absolutely, prevention is, as it demonstrated in this case, prevention is far better than cure. Now, I know there was a second part to this as well, wasn't this enforcement notice that's come out from the solicitors, from the ICO about the solicitors organisation, and it's another area that, again, we quite frequently get involved in, and relates to subject access requests.
Yeah, so this is an intent to enforce this notice. So there's an organisation who have received this notification from the ICO that says, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, we will fine you. And this is around subject access requests. And this organisation has failed to do 2 subject access requests. It's been quite from what I can understand, it's been a very long process. The subject access requests were both put in April 2020, and the enforcement notice has taken this long to come through. Couple of reasons for that. One is because of the pandemic. So I know for a fact that the ICO were very, very behind on their kind of complaints during 2020 and into 2021. So it doesn't surprise me that it's taken this long to come through. But what I'm seeing from the enforcement notice is that the organisation has repeatedly gone back to the ICO and to the data subjects and said, no, we're not going to do the subject access requests. And the ICO have finally said, I'm sorry, no, you have to do it. So they were given from the 14th of February, they were given till the 16th of March to do those subject access requests. So that was yesterday. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next, whether they did them. And if not, what action is then taken.
So learning points.
It's interesting because it's only 2 subject access requests.
Yeah, the learning point though is it's not going to go away, is it? No. Just get on and do it. No, just get on and do it. Just do them. Just do them. And again, for anybody in the call that needs help with understanding a subject access request or how to respond to one, then that's certainly an area, Anna, that you can talk long and passionately about, isn't it? Similarly, I know you can talk long and passionately about cookies, and this debate has been running.
I've done a few hundred of them.
Yeah, about subject access requests, not cookies. Yeah, so cookies, the debate continues. This has been rumbling long and hard in Europe since Schrems 2, really, hasn't it? Since June of 2020, I think it was 2021. It seems to have been an age. This is the passing of data from the EU to the US and around transparency and consent. There's been some activity, hasn't there, in Austria and France? I remember. Do you want to, if I recall correctly, would you like to just summarise what's been going on there, Anna?
Sure, there's so much to talk about in this that I wouldn't want to go into too much detail on such a short call, but yeah, essentially what we're seeing is that there is enforcement activity now taking place in Austria, Belgium, a little bit in France as well, where organisations are being told to stop using certain types of cookies, and these are often around Google Analytics. and the consent, the cookies that are required for Google Analytics. We're seeing very, very strong messaging here from the European regulators that Google Analytics cookies are not only do you, it used to be that you had to seek consent for it, but they're now actually saying you need to stop using Google Analytics cookies. So really, really interesting. Now, if anyone on the call is kind of their spidey senses are tingling and they're going, oh my gosh, we use Google Analytics, don't panic. Absolutely do not panic. There's a couple of tools out there. One of them is Matomo, isn't it, Helen, where which we use on our own website, which does website analytics anonymously. So you know, the regulation, the regulatory activity that we're seeing across Europe, we're not seeing it in the UK yet, though, are we, Helen?
No, we're not. No, we're not. Although we have seen a couple of letters of complaint, haven't we, regarding where cookie banners on websites are incorrect. And I would stress that this is around the banners, it's around the transparency, it's around whether cookies are applied before somebody sees a consent banner, and whether the data is transferred from the company's website to the third party in the US. But we have seen some claims of compensation in that space, haven't we? But we did do a whole webinar on cookies, 6 months ago, haven't we? So I think if anybody's interested in cookies, we can probably point them to some of that or talk to them separately. But yeah, I think it's just something you've got to have on your radar. Would be my recommendation. Is there's stuff happening around it. The ICO in the UK has been quite mute, but it's not going to go away.
I think one of the other points that I just want to mention on that as well, if you are using a kind of one of those cookie pop-up tools, it's worth checking if that tool itself is sending that consent data over to the US, because we've seen some action taking place as well over, you know, where organisations are actually trying to do it right and got those pop-up banners, but the pop-up banner itself is sending that data to the US and doesn't necessarily have those right consents in place. So again, it's not just about the cookies that are on the website. It's, you know, where does that cookie tool reside? What is it doing? Where is it sending the data?
And a busy space. And a similarly busy space is the next point, international data transfer agreements. Wow, where's this come from? What's going on here, Anna? Help.
Helen, I'm sure you know. I do. So where organisations are transferring personal data out to countries that are not what the ICO deem as adequate. So there are some countries where we're able to transfer personal data to with no problems at all. So that's kind of the EU. You know, we're talking about New Zealand. There are a number of countries. I think, is there 13 now, Helen?
It's just increased, isn't it? Just increased.
I think it's just increased. I think
Japan's got some. Yeah, Japan's got some.
South Korea has recently been added. So there are some countries that it's absolutely, you know, the data transfers are quite clear and simple. Where you are doing these transfers to non-adequate countries, you need to have some other protections in place. There are various different ways to protect those transfers. One of them is by these they used to be called standard contractual clauses, SCCs. Those of you who's joined us previously on webinars, I think we've talked about those before, haven't we, Helen?
We have indeed, yep.
But now they are being referred to as international data transfer agreements, IDTAs. Helen, they don't make this easy, do they? It's just all these acronyms. So where you have personal data transfers that are occurring, these new IDTAs will be effective most likely from the 21st of March. So what's that? Is that Monday? I think it's Monday.
Yes, Monday, isn't it?
The caveat on that is unless it's sitting with Parliament at the moment, and they will come into effect on the 21st of March if there's no amendments put through Parliament. So I have checked. I've been a little geeky this afternoon and checked, on the parliamentary website. It doesn't look like there's any amendments at the moment, but that doesn't mean to say something else won't happen over the next few days. And then we will all have until the 21st of September 2022 to ensure that the IDTs are in place to protect any new personal data transfers, and then any existing personal data transfers we have till the 21st of March 2024.
Yeah, no, you and I, we participated in the consultation, didn't we, with the ICO? We put our 2 pence in regarding these data transfers, and my thoughts, and I certainly put some information into the Federation of Small Business as well, who also responded to the Commissioner's consultation on this. This is mega complicated for small businesses who typically don't have in-house counsel, legal counsel, etc., to help them through this. We will obviously help any organisations if they need help and support. And we're also expecting, it's not been issued yet, has it? Because we haven't seen this effectiveness confirmed, but we know that the Information Commissioner will be providing more advice and guidance, and one would assume that would be from Monday if these come into effect on Monday. So don't panic at the moment, because we do have this 6 months grace period up until the 21st of September for new transfers. There will be lots of information. And guess what, Anna? I think we might be covering this on the next call as well, when we see a little bit more information coming through.
I suspect we might do, yes.
Right, so what else is happening as a general roundup? And has anybody got any questions or concerns? Any other things they'd like to ask, any thoughts on?
I guess, well,
any other things you want to cover?
I guess there's one thing that popped into my mind, Helen. Let's talk a little bit about any data that was being collected over the COVID pandemic, because if you have been collecting any data through the COVID pandemic, so whether it's, testing, all that kind of data that we were all required to, businesses were required to collect and process during that pandemic. I think now that those COVID regs have rolled back, and we're not under those same regulations, I think it's important that we all start to revisit any data collection. Look at what were you collecting, why you were collecting it. That's quite important, because if you were collecting it for certain legal reasons, those legal reasons are likely to have now changed. So, if it's something that you've decided as an organisation to keep doing, it's important to revisit that and understand why you're doing it and how that fits in with the data protection regulation. And if you're not, if you've stopped, oh, sorry, go on, Helen.
No, I was going to say, we're talking things like temperature tests, aren't we? And results of lateral flow tests, that type of thing. Yep. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, if you have stopped doing it, brilliant. Just start to have a think about, do you need to keep it? And if so, why, and how you're going to keep it, how are you going to protect it, how are you going to keep it secure? If you did a DPIA around that collection, so a data privacy impact assessment, if you did one of those, I think it's a good time now to revisit it in light of any changes that you might need to make. So I think it's one of those things that could quite easily fall by the wayside now, because we're all in that woohoo, let's get on. But it's quite easy to kind of actually continue. I know there's quite a few organisations out there who are continuing from a health and safety perspective to make sure that their staff are safe and well, and that their premises are COVID free, COVID secure. So yeah, just time to revisit it, I think. Helen, what do you think?
Oh, no, I completely agree. It's our whole thing, isn't it? Is you can't lose data if you haven't got it. So if you haven't got it, if you just get rid of it, if you're not using data, please dispose of it, and dispose of it safely. So make sure it's deleted, make sure it's shredded, do whatever, but don't keep it just in case. That's never a great. We haven't got a legal basis if we have just in case we're withholding data. So no questions from the audience. I'm appreciating that we're hurtling towards the bottom of the half hour. Anna, thank you very much once again for having a quick whistle-stop tour of where we are in the world of privacy and privacy. We've obviously covered information security a little bit earlier in the day. We are back again in 3 months' time on June the 23rd for another run round and roundup of what's happening in the space of data privacy. And you're also going to be delivering, for those people that are in Coventry and Warwickshire, we'll be delivering some free education, I believe, from an HR perspective, HR and data privacy, which will be done in conjunction with the HR department. Waiting for a date to be confirmed on that. But if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about that, then obviously just keep an eye on the Risk Evolves website and any of the social media on LinkedIn and so on. But otherwise, just remains for me to say thank you very much, Anna, and we'll see you all again in a couple of months. Keep safe.